Lowlands. It's not just me for this one, thankfully. I'm joined by Johnny from the Belfast Whisky Club, and we're going to have a wee chat about these excellent drams, 6 whiskies, all from the Lowland region. Probably an area which I would think most people overlook in the past. I suspect when people think of the Lowlands, they just think of Glenkinchie and Auchentoshan. But recently, as with the rest of Scotland, there's been a whole spurt of new distilleries which have cropped up, especially in the Lowlands. In Fife, in Ayrshire, Dumfries and Galloway. So I think there's probably about 18 distilleries now in the Lowlands, which people sort of don't really think of. Most of them are single malt and quite young distilleries, but some of them are single grain distilleries as well. So we'll be covering one of those during the tasting. We've got 6 drams. I'm not going to do them exactly in order, but I'll keep you right and tell you which one we're going to do in turn. So I'll give you the number of the dram and also the name, so that you can follow. But welcome, Johnny. Glad to have you here. So it's not just me talking to the camera.
Absolutely, glad to be with somebody that can give me some knowledge about the Lowlands, and that was going to be my first question. Is okay. What am I looking out for in the Lowlands? Because we talk about these different areas of Scotland. So is there certain tastings? Is there certain elements to the whiskey that I should be looking out for?
I wouldn't say so. Traditionally, people have always thought of the Lowlands as kind of like a light and sort of fruity character. Yeah. But I think more and more the regional sort of variations in Scotch whisky, those lines have become increasingly blurred. Right. Yeah. So I always say, you can have a peated Speyside or you can have an unpeated Islay. And so with the Lowlands, traditionally, so in the 1800s, early 1900s, they were peated whiskies, okay. Which people sometimes aren't really aware of. So that light and fruity character isn't necessarily sort of traditional. But I think if you ask somebody about a Lowland whiskey, because it's say like Glenkinchie, that's kind of the flavour profile that they would instantly think of. But we've got plenty to explore, and I think we'll find that there's a whole variety of different flavour profiles here. So it'll be interesting to see if anybody can say there is any typical Lowland characteristic by the end of the 6.
Yeah. It's good to see it's a similar, it's coming together like Irish whiskey. Irish whiskey, they always say, is triple distilled, it's light, it's fruity, but there are certain new distilleries out there that are proven different as well.
Absolutely.
We had Brett and Carty last night from Cologne, so so really looking forward to it.
Yeah, good stuff. I'm going to remind you, you've probably heard this like 1,000 times from all the other presenters, but if you have any comments, any tasting notes that you'd like to share with us, any questions, if you could just put them through the Q&A tab in the chat. If you put it in the chat, we won't see it, but if you click on the Q&A tab, which is at the top in the middle, and then put all of your comments through there, I'll be checking on my phone, and as well in the comment, if you could add your name, because I don't get a name which comes through, so it'd be quite nice to know who's sending through these comments. So anyway, we've talked enough, because people are probably looking at all these drams and they just want to have a shot. So we're actually going to start with number 1. Okay, so the first whiskey is number 1, and that will be labelled in your pack as the 1770 release number 1. And this is coming in at 46%. So quite a nice easy start. Now 1770 is a release from a relatively new distillery called Glasgow Distillery. The 1770, it refers to a distillery that is no longer in existence, and that's Dundas Hill, and it was Glasgow's first distillery. So I think the reason that they've chosen that date is because Glasgow Distillery was the first malt distillery in Glasgow, proper in the centre, for over 100 years. So I think that's why they've gone with the 1770 date. Some of these marketing things are a wee bit tenuous at best.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing was the 1770, and then one of the things I actually noticed earlier on was they actually do a triple distilled
release
as well. How common is that?
I'm not triple distilled.
Yeah.
So we've got well, we do have a whiskey later on, the Auchentoshan. So Auchentoshan is the only Scottish distillery that triple distills for its entire production.
Okay.
So there are other distilleries that do for part of it, but it's not terribly common.
Yeah.
No, yeah, it's not like in Ireland.
And some would say it's not Ireland either, but there you go.
Yeah.
No, it was just interesting to see. It's very rare to see.
Uh-huh.
So this one is the original, finished in virgin oak, yeah.
Yes. So this is first fill ex-bourbon.
Mm-hmm.
And then finished in virgin oak. Now I don't know how long it was finished in virgin oak for, but it's not terribly old as an expression.
No, you get that.
Mm-hmm,
You get that young sort of fresh apple.
Absolutely. It's not bad on the nose actually.
No.
It hasn't quite got the sort of the malty, gristy sort of harsh notes that sometimes you can get with a young whiskey, but there is a lot of pressure on new distilleries to release something quite young, get it out quite early. The 3-year maturation, minimum maturation time, it can be a financial barrier, especially for new distilleries. I think one of my concerns is with all of these new distilleries coming up, if you think about, they've got 2 income streams apart from selling their whiskey. So they can either, maybe 3 income streams. So they can either make something like gin, get that out, straight off the still, in the bottle, out it goes, whilst they're waiting for their whiskey to mature. If they've got a visitor centre, then obviously they've got the tourists, so that's an income stream. Or they can source whiskey from elsewhere and bottle it and say, this is kind of the flavour profile that we're looking for. Okay. Glasgow didn't do that. They released a 27-year-old sourced whiskey called Prometheus. Right, okay. Chalk and cheese. Yeah, yes. It's not a 27-year-old whiskey we're doing, yeah. So with some of the newer distilleries, if you think of the last 18 months, they've not had any visitors. Okay. Yeah, so there may be a little bit of extra pressure on them to get this whiskey out earlier than perhaps was originally planned. But this came out, production started in 2015. And this was released in 2018, so this is 3 years old. Okay. So on the nose, are you picking out any certain aromas?
Well, it's definitely that green apple. You definitely get that. It's that toasted wood character that you get from virgin oak, and it gives you that little bit of like tannin just in the finish that you get with virgin oak. They also do a peated version as well, don't they?
They do both peated and unpeated spirit. So I was lucky enough to have a look around the distillery in 2015, not long after they started production, and it's small. You always have this romantic notion of where what a distillery is going to look like, with the pagoda roof and all this. It's just on an industrial estate. It's just a wee unit.
But no, what are we talking about small? Because we're going to get to a distillery later on that calls itself one of the smallest in Scotland, and one of its batches is 6,000 bottles. You're in Ireland here, so small is at a very different level. We have a garage with a couple of stills in it for small in Ireland.
Yeah, okay, maybe not that small. No, I mean it's they've recently expanded, so it's probably a little bit bigger now. Okay. I think they put some more washbacks in, and 7 washbacks, I think, and a couple of extra stills. Okay. So it has expanded. But when I visited in 2015, it was just like, your sort of average industrial unit on an industrial estate. So that was where the maturation, the warehouse was taking place as well. So you literally walked in, you had the gin still, you had the wash still, the spirit still, and then you had the sort of little racks in the back where some of the casks were actually maturing. And that was pretty much it.
So exactly like you get in those romantic labels where it's out in the country and the fresh air,
That's it. You could come out of the Glasgow distillery, hit the dual carriageway. I can't remember if it was a McDonald's or a Burger King across the road.
I can't remember them having that on the label. I may be wrong about that. But
do you know what? They're great. They're great guys. And as Liam Hughes. He's an Irishman, and he's a really good laugh. And I remember he came to the Spirit of Speyside festival, so that was 2016, and he brought some samples of the liquid that had been, I'm going to say maturing, but it had been in virgin oak for 4-5 months, and it was phenomenal. Yeah. But I don't know what you think of this. I mean,
I'm quite impressed for young liquid. There's a couple of things that I've had across the festival that have been young liquid that have actually, impressed me more than something. And there could be an element of something says 14-year-old, so I'm expecting more from it. But I've been quite impressed with the young liquid that I've seen come out. I'm a good fan of a virgin oak finish. So that element that and it is. I don't know if it is tannin. Would you call it tannin? Just that bit of dryness you get at the back is something I'm quite a fan of.
I think, I mean, on the palate, it's got, that virgin oak has really given it quite a lot of spice.
Yeah.
For me, I think this one could have done with a wee bit longer.
It's not something you sort of get smacked up the face with that sort of that green fruit, that sort of young spirit at the start. You don't get. You don't get the virgin oak right away.
I'm not 100% sure how many bottles of this there were, but I'll just have a quick look. I did a wee bit of research. Not too sure. But I mean, obviously, they're doing brilliantly, and I'm sure when you taste young liquid, sometimes you are assessing it on the way it is now, but you're also kind of looking at what perhaps it might hold for the future,
where it's going to go,
and how promising it feels, So I think they've done different cask releases, and they'll definitely.
I think there's definitely enough of the distillate there to hold up to a bit more aging.
Yeah,
so I
absolutely.
I think there's a good sign.
Yeah, thumbs up from the guys here. Yeah, okay.
Joy, very good.
Excellent. So so we have. So that was our first dram, Glasgow. So we're going to move on to dram number 2 now, and that is number 2 in your tasting packs.
It's getting very traditional for one of your tastings.
It is, yes. I'll mix it up as we go along, but I think some of these, one of these whiskies is peated. So it would really do the others a great disservice that followed it if we just put it in the tasting in the middle. So I always think when you do these tastings, you have to think, people have spent a long time creating these whiskies, and the workmanship that's gone onto it. So it's not just about the distiller. It's also about the who's grown the barley, who's made the cask. There's all sorts of things that have gone into this, and a considerable amount of time. So I think the least we can do is try and portray these whiskies in the best possible light.
Absolutely.
And as I say, not do them any disservice at all.
Right.
So the second whisky is number 2, and that's a Bladnoch 11 years. That's coming in at a 46.7%. So we've just gone up a wee notch here. Now, have you been to any of the Lowland distilleries at all? Have you?
I have not. Do you know what I mean? It's a great shame. A great Paddy, one of the great members of the club, shows us all the time these distilleries that he visits and these beautiful locations. And my experience of visiting these has been, it's a crying shame. So it is. Been around Ireland, been around lots of different ones in Ireland, but unfortunately in Scotland, I will get to it. I have family there, so I should definitely get to it.
Yeah.
But this, as far as I know from my research, this is. Bladnoch is an old name, but it's been brought back recently in what they're doing.
Yeah, so the distillery is still on the same site, so it's not like they've resurrected the name on a different distillery site. So it is still the same site, but it was taken over by an Australian called David Pryor. So the distillery hadn't been used for a long time. It was taken over by David Pryor. Now he bought the distillery in 2015. So this is a guy, he's Australian. I believe he made his name or his fortune in yogurt. Okay. So maybe there's some
not a high ABV in yogurt.
Depends on which dram. So he's taken this distillery over in 2015. Then 2 years later, the first spirit came off the new stills.
Okay.
So these are new stills. All of the equipment from the previous distillery, I believe, most of it was was all changed. It was a whole big refurb.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you haven't had too many drams in, you're probably working out the numbers and you're thinking, well, this is an 11 years old whiskey, and production there didn't start until 2017, so that doesn't quite add up. So this was the stock that was included in that sale. So there were quite a few casks that were part of that sale when David Pryor took it over. So this would have been spirit that was made by the previous owners of Bladnoch and just released, I guess, because they have that stock. So why not release it? Yeah,
Absolutely.
What else are they going to do with it? So 11 years in bourbon casks. And I'm actually a big fan of Bladnoch whiskey.
Now, I am going to say my first silly thing of the tasting, and it's possibly because you said yogurt, but there is
the power of suggestion.
It is. Well, is it the power of suggestion? Is there's like an off sort of musty,
okay,
like fermented note,
yeah,
maybe that I'm getting.
Okay, there's a great Scottish word, fusty. I mentioned it to someone earlier at the Jameson tasting. And so, yeah, it has got a slight sort of fusty element to it. But I think it'll be, it's got quite a sort of, almost like a white wine, grapey kind of note to it as well. It's it's very, very light. Unfortunately, we've got these dark glasses.
These lovely glasses to look at, but yeah, when you're trying to assess the colour, maybe not. You can look at the bottle. It is very light. And this is this first fill bourbon?
I think all I know is it's bourbon casks.
Okay.
There's not a huge amount of transparency there. Usually, if you sort of dig deep enough, you can find out that information. But all I have is bourbon casks. I should imagine it's a mixture of like refill, first fill, all 11 years, and then kind of married together, I guess. But yeah, let's have a wee nose and have a wee taste. They do a blend as well. It's called Pure Scott.
Okay.
It's one that I've had arguments with the company on Instagram with because they originally had the most sexist advertising. There's no other way I can do it. But it always used to make me laugh because they would have these very scantily clad women standing on a balcony as this kind of the epitome of being pure Scot. And I think my argument was, you've clearly not been to Scotland.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's no woman in her right mind in November would be hanging out on a balcony dressed like that. So not quite as pure Scot as they think. But I'm a funny feeling because I visited the distillery probably only about 3 weeks ago now.
Okay.
So it's down in Dumfries and Galloway, and it's the most southern Scotch malt whiskey distillery. Okay. So yeah, I didn't really take that into account when I set off. It was a bit of a spur of the moment thing. It took me about 3 hours to get there. I wasn't expecting that. It's near a place called Wigtown, which is, or Wigton, depending on how you want to pronounce it, which is really quite famous for its book festivals. It's like it's a tiny wee place. It's got like more bookshops than anything else. Wonderful area, beautiful area to visit. And so, yeah, we toured the distillery, and I'm not 100% sure, but I kind of recollect them saying that with the Pure Scot blend, there may be some of the liquid that they're currently producing in that blend. But yeah, don't quote me on that, anyone.
Yes, there was a great push for transparency over the last sort of 18 months, but there's been a little bit of pushback from people. So I've noticed over the festival, people would talk about particular distilleries, but we've now got we've changed to, very famous Highland distillery or very famous Isla distillery. We've got a little bit less specific this year, I have noticed. But that is great. There's definitely on the palate, you definitely get that grape note. That sort of, there is definitely a white wine.
It's almost like a sort of white wine note coming through, or grape juice note, which is quite unusual. But yeah, all I've managed to find out is that this has been matured in bourbon casks, so no finish, nothing. But I do think the Bladnoch spirit itself is good, and the bottles. Some of them are limited. You see them on the secondary auctions now for, I don't know, whatever price. And people, I've got a good friend who's a big sort of Bladnoch collector, so he'll go all out for them. But it's one that tends to fall under the radar, I think. But that's probably the same with a lot of these lowland distilleries.
Definitely, and how do you feel when people bring back a distillery like that? Do you think that they should stay true to how they were with history, or are you happy enough with them doing their own thing and finding an identity for that brand in this time?
I'm fine with either. I think the most important thing is that you're transparent. Yeah. So if you're releasing an 11 years old Bladnoch, but you've not had the distillery for 11 years, just make it clear to those people who want to know the information behind the liquid, because not everybody wants to know, not everybody cares, but if you're sort of a real whiskey enthusiast, a nerd, a geek, whatever, you really want that information, but sometimes it's very difficult. And it's not a question of keeping it top secret because of competitors, it's just information. So I think, honesty, transparency. So if you're going to do something different, grand, be honest about it. If you're going to try and recreate the same sort of flavour profile from before, then great, just be honest about it. I guess you can't really ask for much more than that.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you rate this one? So somebody has said 4 out of 10 for dram number 1. We've not got a score yet.
4 out of 10. Who was that? Was that Paddy? It wasn't called Paddy, was it? Sounds like a score from him.
For the Glasgow. Hopefully, we might get another comment coming through and see what they're going to give for the Bladnoch. But no, I think that's actually a pretty decent dram.
It certainly is. There's the complexity there from the age.
But you do have that that sort of old, sort of like a sort of damp wood note coming through.
I did see people questioning before with like the 10-year-old. They were questioning where the casks were stored in the interim period for that musty, but it's not unpleasant. I think it adds a certain element to the whiskey. It's not something that I dislike. I don't think it's a bad cask, but there's definitely something present there. Yeah, I
think a few of us were saying earlier that sometimes when you come out with these tasting notes, they just sound like the least appealing thing. You talk about, it's like a petrol note, or sort of like a meaty Bovril note or something like this. But it's actually what you're looking for.
Absolutely.
Okay, we've gone to 4.5. This is John D. So we've got 4.5 for dram number 2.
Oh, that's
fantastic. It's getting better, at least.
At least we're going up.
Indeed, yes.
We might be on 6 by the time we end.
Okay, so we'll move swiftly on to dram number 3. Okay, so dram number 3 is your Daft Mill 2008. Okay, now Daft Mill from Fife. Huge, hugely, well, there's 6 distilleries now in Fife. So, most of them relatively new. But Daft Mill actually was built in 2004, 2005. And the distiller, Francis, just waited and waited and waited. And everybody in the whiskey community was going absolutely nuts. Like, when are you going to release your whiskey? When are you going to release your whiskey? And he just waited and he just waited. And so he released it at 12 years old. No, it's a tiny, tiny distillery. And Francis is a great bloke. I mean, if anyone can get a chance to go and visit Daft Mill, go. Because people always go, oh, once you visited one distillery, it's all the same. When I visited Daft Mill, I think I was there for about 2.5 hours, and it was just an pure education. I learned so much from that 2.5 hours. He's just a great bloke, he really is. So he's a farmer. He grows the barley, and he distills seasonally. So this is why we've got the sort of winter batch and then the summer batch. So because he is a farmer, he works the stills around his farming, which is how it was all done traditionally. So it's pretty much sort of, I guess, like in the olden days, they were sort of adding value to the crop. And so he distills in the winter when it's a bit quieter on the farm, and in the summer. But in the spring, obviously, the sowing, or the seeds of the barley, and getting the farm ready. And then autumn time, it's the harvest. So it's the summer and the winter where he distills, and this is. As I say, this is the Daft Mill 2008 winter batch, and if you get a bottle of Daft Mill, you will see on the back of the label so much information that it's actually, it's astounding when you think, well, if they can do it, why can't everybody else? So I can tell you just from looking at the label that it was first fill ex-bourbon casks. This is all to see, yeah. So first fill ex-bourbon casks. The barley variety was Optic. It was harvested in August 2006. Maltings took place. The malting of the barley was in Alloa in the summer of 2007. It was matured in the upper level of Warehouse 1. I mean, the detail on the bottle is phenomenal.
Phenomenal. I mean, Warehouse 1, I prefer Warehouse 2, no, I'm joking. But what I love about this is it's properly circular. We grows the own barley. The barley then goes out for feed. The yeast even goes out, I think, to fertilise the fields as well. It's properly circular.
Well, I mean, and that is traditionally how it was done. I mean, when you think, not necessarily in the Lowlands per se, but certainly sort of as you went more up to the Highlands at the end of the 1700s, during the early 1800s, the barley that was grown there wasn't of the best quality. I'm not saying Francis's barley isn't good quality, but traditionally, yeah.
Disclaimer.
And so the prices that they could get for selling the grain were pretty low because it wasn't the best quality grain. So the easiest thing was for them to distill, and therefore, and sell the whiskey, and therefore, they got much more money from that than they would from actually just selling the grain. The byproducts would have been used to feed cattle to get them through the winter months. So the farmers in the Highlands, there was no real industry of any other kind. It was agriculture and farming. So distilling was like intrinsically linked to that. And I guess it's kind of like, it's like a wee bit like the old days, this is how it was traditionally done. And they don't make a song and dance out of it. So it's not some sort of marketing bullshit. It's just what he does.
Absolutely. No, I think it's great. I think, and the one thing about waiting to, release your liquid is you want it to be good when you release it. And I think this is a perfect example of what we were talking about, where there is definitely a meaty, sort of savoury undertone to this, but not in an unpleasant way. You've still got fruit there. It adds complexity. It adds a separate level to what he's doing.
So Francis runs the stills very, very slowly.
Yeah.
And I guess this sort of increases the amount of copper contact that the liquid has with the still. The line arms, they run upwards, so it's only the heavier oils like fall back into the still, and then a sort of redistilled.
Yeah.
So he creates a very sort of light spirit that I think works brilliantly with bourbon cask maturation.
Yeah.
Now he has done some sherry cask maturation. So I run the Fife Whiskey Festival, and Francis has been to the last 2 of the festivals. So he doesn't go to too many. I guess he's got very limited stock. It's such a small distillery. But he's 10 minutes down the road from where